range glasses, so I'm sure we'll get through that. So this afternoon, I haven't seen Marley yet.
That would be me.
Well, there you go. Well, welcome, Marley. You were on my list to welcome.
Yes, there was a queue out there, so I was a little late for that. Yes, I'm here now.
Welcome. The rest of the team are mainly online, unfortunately. So welcome to this afternoon's meeting. And I'm Keith Blazer, I'm the chairman. We have apologies from Matt, from Jeremy, from Alan Jarrett, from John Housel and Martin Harris. And we have some replacements, which I may get to in a moment, because if I don't, I'm going to be in trouble. And a welcome today to Holly. Holly finally joined us as our new Tfse Communications Manager. So welcome to Holly. I've now got to just remind you that if you're joining virtually or in person, if you can keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, as this will prevent background noise. And if you have any questions or comments, if you just raise your hand, please, then Microsoft Teams will raise a hand and those present will see where you are. And also just remind folks that the meeting is also being broadcast to members of the public today on YouTube. So welcome for that. So we come to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of July. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So we've come to agenda item 3, which is declarations of interest. Is there anybody on the board that needs to declare any interest at this time? There are none. Okay. There are statements from the public, just to inform members that there have been no statements have been requested by members of the public at this meeting. Future board meetings and format. I think that the virtual meeting, the hybrid meeting is overwhelming success. There are 5 members here and the rest of you have joined online. So what I would suggest with your agreement is that we hold the next meeting as a virtual meeting and we will come together at least for the AGM. And I'm not sure if that's the following meeting or the one after that. But we can confirm this at our meetings as we go forward. So if there's no objection, I would suggest that we take the next meeting virtual and have this agenda item again there. Nobody deferring from that? You enjoyed your trip up, I'm sure, but it would have been much easier on the camera. So thank you for that. So now we come on to the first substantive item really of the day, which is the future role and responsibilities of Tfse. And I'm going to ask Rachel to introduce, and Stephen is here as well, I think.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Chair. As board members are aware, we commissioned Arup in April this year to lead a review of the Transport for the South East structures in advance of the development of the SIC. The work is focused on the tools that we might need to deliver the 2050 vision and to implement the strategic investment plan, as well as the organisational structures and governance and capacity to support this. We've undertaken a lot of engagement with the board, senior officers and stakeholders throughout the last few months on this piece of work, and I'm pleased to welcome Stephen and his team at Arup to present their findings. The plan is that we will then take forward the work that Arup shared with us today in a report that will be presented to the January board meeting with preferred recommendations for the board to consider. So I will hand over to James and Stephen so that they can share their screen and talk you through the findings of the report.
Thank you, Rachel, and hello, everybody. I see some familiar faces that I've met before at our workshop, and hello to everybody else. My name is Stephen Bennett. I'm a director at Arup in the transport consulting business, and I have my colleague online also, James Shaw, who was the project manager for the work. What we plan to do, if you can see the slides okay, I'll just go into full screen mode. Can I just get confirmation that everyone can see the slides?
Yes.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. You never quite know what's showing up. So we've got a short presentation here that gives a summary of our sort of conclusions and recommendations on the future roles and responsibilities work. We're towards the end of the study, so we will be putting in a final report aiming for the end of this week. But this is a great opportunity to get your feedback and any sort of comments and points of emphasis that we can incorporate into our final report. So we welcome comments and questions at the end of the presentation. So to start with, just to recap on the project approach, which some of you will be familiar with, but as a reminder, we undertook a huge amount of stakeholder engagement in the first half of the study, both with the Tfse organisation itself, with the board, with the senior officers group, as well as the external stakeholders, particularly DFT, Network Rail, National Highways, and other partners. We undertook a survey, and then we supplemented that with our own research and drawing on our experience, comparison and benchmarking with work we've done with other subnational transport bodies. And that led us to develop some conclusions, which we then went through with the Tfse organisation, with the officers, and then with the Tfse board in the workshop in September, which was great to see some of you face to face. And as I said, this is now the opportunity to do the final presentation, and we'll be submitting our report very shortly. And I think one of the first points to make that struck us from the engagement that we undertook was that stakeholder feedback is pretty much universally very positive about transport for the South East. And there's some points here backed up by some quotes we took from the engagement. But Tfse really is valued as a regional layer of transport governance in the system. There is clear support for Tfse's role in developing and delivering the regional transport strategy. Again, it was fairly universally welcomed by the stakeholders we spoke to have that strategy in place. And Tfse's role as the interface between central government and local transport authorities is really valued, and in both directions. So I think we understood the value that DFT sees as being one voice for the region, but it was also the value that particularly DFT put on Tfse being able to communicate messages and sort of steer the delivery of policy in the region. That was also interesting. But I think knowing that, it's also there is a need for that the Tfse evolves into an influential body that's focused on its strategic objectives and delivery, and it's particularly that delivery aspect that's important. So we developed a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, both sort of internal and external aspects, as well as the sort of helpful and harmful aspects. And I won't go through all of that in detail. That will be in our report for you to look at. But just to summarise some of the key points that came from this. As I've mentioned, strong stakeholder support and value for Tfse from local authorities, from the DFT and delivery bodies such as National Highways and Network Rail. I think threats were recognised as the uncertainty over the longer term funding for the organisation going from year to year being a challenge, and the status by not having that statutory status at the moment. And I think the weakness or potential weakness is really the having the capacity and capability to deliver the transport strategy that you've developed as being a sort of risk in future. But I think overcoming those, there is a real role there for Tfse to lead the delivery of that transport strategy for the South East region if we can address those sort of threats and weaknesses. So what we thought was a good starting point for that is then to identify the organisational objectives for Tfse based on a number of drivers for change. So just looking at the top half of the screen here, the original drivers from DFT being sort of challenges of policy delivery in the region, the difficulty of effectively disseminating information and struggling to reach all of the local transport authorities to deliver on its policies. I think after the transport strategy was issued, those evolved a bit. So then recognising the regional coordination role, but looking for a clear view of investment priorities in the region to help them with decision making, and then to deliver their policy priorities. And I think for local authorities, the drivers are that it's not always easy to action and implement government policy, and having a sort of regional body to help steer that is useful. To unlock funding is an important role, and to the recognising that we can influence government as a collective and collaboratively much more than we can as individuals. So we've drawn out 3 organisational objectives from that at the bottom of the screen here. So number 1, identify and support interventions that deliver the transport vision and strategy. The second one is securing high levels of transport investment in the South East Strategic Transport Network. And the third one is supporting TfSE's key stakeholders in responding to and overcoming emerging transport challenges. So just to highlight here, what we're not doing here is kind of ripping up what's been done before and starting again. I think these objectives for the organisation build on all of the previous work that's been done back from the economic connectivity work that was done in 2018 through the transport strategy and TfSE's own business plan. And these have emerged from the stakeholder discussions that we've had as well. So we think these are quite key organisational objectives for TfSE. I think they're powerful because of the benefits they deliver for the stakeholders of TfSE. So it's just some examples here. So for local authorities, having that clear framework and strategy for transport improvements is important, and streamlining that access to government funding really critical. For the residents, visitors and businesses, you can just see from the original economic connectivity work, there's a huge amount to gain from delivering a better sort of connectivity, accessibility in the region for people. Central government benefits because then it's delivering on their objectives of things like decarbonisation, levelling up, health and well-being, and so on. And also for the operators and the people at the front line of delivering transport. If we deliver the strategy, we can improve user satisfaction, increase use of the public transport system, and increase network efficiency. So there's a huge amount for all the stakeholders to gain from a real focus on those organisational objectives. But to deliver those strategic objectives, we then need to think about the value chain of TfSE activities. And if you're not familiar with the term value chain, it's really just all of the activities that TfSE as an organisation does or may do. And we structured that in these 4 areas on the left here. So the sort of national level government decision making, the strategy, policy and prioritisation at a regional and local level, planning and delivery, and then operation and maintenance of both infrastructure and services in the area. So that's how we look at the value chain, and those who were in the workshop might recognise this. But then from those 4 areas, we can identify a number of functions at each level that TfSE is either engaged with or could potentially be engaged with in future. So you can see examples there from at the national strategy and policy level to the strategy, policy and prioritisation level, which is where TfSE has been most active to date. But there's sort of new areas there on funding and financing and sort of business case making. And then as you move into planning and delivery, it's more about sort of setting output requirements, options development and selection, the consultation and engagement and delivery of infrastructure. And then the final one on operation and maintenance is about sort of delivering schemes, getting them operational, and things like asset maintenance and sort of passenger experience and marketing and branding as well. And from the engagement and the workshops that we had with the stakeholders, some clear areas of priority stood out that we captured. So at the national level, sort of involvement in national strategy and policy, and that sort of modelling for the economy, so inputting on data and evidence. Clearly, there's been a lot of work to date on the transport strategy and regional transport policy, but I think stakeholders are recognising a clear role for TfSE in funding and finance, the data and modelling and the business case making for schemes as we move into delivery. And then on planning and delivery, a number of stakeholders recognising the importance of being involved in sort of setting output requirements, options development and selection for regional level interventions, and continued role in that consultation with the stakeholders. There were less less of a recognition of kind of the importance of the operation and maintenance side of things. I think it was kind of expanding the areas into those highlighted ones, but I think there was a recognition that there could be a move into some of those operations and maintenance areas, perhaps at a later date. And there's a lot of information on this screen. So again, this will be in our report, so you don't have to take all of this in. But basically, we got a lot of really rich information from discussions with the stakeholders about what areas and what specific activities TFSE should be doing against each of those areas of the value chain. So to take an example on funding and finance, recognising a role to identify and develop new funding streams, financing, for example, private sector investment of schemes, and helping to sort of distribute funds received to regionally important interventions and projects. In business case making, helping develop business cases for regional level schemes and supporting regional members, regional stakeholders in developing business cases for interventions themselves. So there's a number of areas, those ones highlighted in grey as potential additional activities that we recognise that TFSE should be doing as it evolves into a delivery body. And what stood out to us from these discussions was sort of three key areas of focus that could really steer change in the region and help deliver those organisational objectives that we've identified. And they're set out here. So number one was the regional data and modelling capability. It was recognised by a lot of stakeholders that the strong evidence base you develop for the strategy is really valuable, and I think has got the reason it's been so well accepted. But the thing is that things change rapidly. We've had the pandemic since a lot of that work was done, and that needs to be kept up to date and to be at a level that can inform sort of delivery and business case making for schemes. The second one was evolving to deliver the strategic investment plan. So making sure that as that plan is developed and produced for government, that the organisation evolves to support that and secure the investment in the southeast. And the third one is then to implement the future mobility and freight strategy. I think it was recognised by a lot of people that to do that at an individual local authority level is challenging, and TFSE could have a really key role in sort of looking at the future trends and challenges that are coming up and working with its partners to develop solutions to those. So three key themes we thought were important to deliver on the organisational objectives. And what that meant to us really was it leads to a step change in TFSE roles and responsibilities as we move forward. So just to illustrate that here, sort of on the left hand side, we've got TFSE 1.0 as we call it. So undertaking a number of important roles at national strategy and policy level, the regional strategy, engagement and consultation being important. But that role, to deliver on all of those things I've just talked about, we'll need to expand into new areas like the funding and financing, the business case making, as well as sort of setting output requirements and developing options development and selection for interventions. And that has implications for capacity and the organisation. And that means some organisational development is needed. And I think, we're not saying here, I don't think it's a radical change and a huge increase. I think it's organic growth of the organisation to undertake those additional functions that we've identified. So if you take the triangle here on the left, which we use to kind of articulate the organisation from the sort of vision and strategy at the top of the pyramid down to the operating model and ways of working at the bottom of the pyramid. And just some thoughts on the right there about how the organisation might develop. So having that renewed focus on strategic objectives and roles and responsibilities to deliver the transport strategy is important. And the two in the middle there on expanding the capacity and capability to align with those for future functions that you want to undertake, and expanding the governance and organisation, both with the technical capability as well as the strategic leadership, and recognising that the supply chain will still be important to provide specialist support or additional capacity to TFSE as it needs it. And the final one there is really to keep building on the strength of the collaborative working approach that TFSE's had with stakeholders. It's been very successful to deliver on shared objectives, and that focus on technical excellence to provide the data and evidence behind sort of the case making to secure investment in the region. So we were also asked to look at the need for statutory status for TFSE. And here's some thoughts from us here and our recommendations. And there was quite mixed feedback from the stakeholders that we spoke to on this topic. A number of people advocated the need for TFSE to have statutory status, but others were of the view that it's not essential at this time to achieve the strategic objectives. Our experience from other subnational transport bodies indicates that statutory status doesn't always guarantee additional recognition or funding. There are still a number of challenges to be overcome, but of course it can increase the influence, things like becoming a statutory consultee, and would be needed in the longer term for the later, those sort of lower functions of the value chain in terms of delivery, operation and maintenance. So, you know, for example, if you're assembling land for a scheme or wanting to operate services, having statutory status would be important to that. And some suggested there may be interim alternatives that could be effective that have been deployed for other STBs, things like a memorandum of understanding to sort of maintain the status of the organisation before you get to full statutory status. So our recommendations, taking this into account, are really we think to hold off another application for statutory status right now. I think there's other things to focus energy and effort on. I think we need to see what comes out of the Levelling Up white paper, which we hope will come out soon, but we'll see. And other developments around subnational transport bodies. There's kind of mixed messages coming out at the moment, but you know, we think government does recognise an important role for STBs. Certainly throughout that period, maintaining engagement with DFT and considering interim agreements just to keep up that sort of level of recognition is important. And that focus on longer term funding certainty, really important. I know there's work ongoing at the moment to try to secure a multi-year settlement for funding for the organisation, you know, and that's really critical to give a bit more certainty, both for delivery of schemes, but also for things like, you know, staff recruitment and retention in the organisation. And then the final thought there is to, if appropriate, to consider an application for statutory status to align with the publication of the SIP, which is currently scheduled for early 2023. And I think if you're moving towards the SIP and there's positive signs from government that that application would be welcomed, I think that's a good time to have it as the SIP lands on tables of ministers in government. So our final slide here is on the roadmap to deliver all of that. So to move from strategy to delivery. And we've just got 4 strands here that we've recognised as important things to focus on. So number 1 is to produce that organisational development plan, so you can build the leadership and technical capacity and capability you need to take on the expanded functions. The second one is that focus on regional data modelling and analytics and how you're going to develop that going into the future, so that, you know, you've got that information to support business case making and the SIP delivery. A key one, obviously, in evolving to deliver the SIP, the development and production of that document, and then beyond its submission, then delivering on the recommendations in there. And that final strand on the sort of future mobility and freight strategy pilot schemes to develop, you know, scale, find out what works on the ground, and then look at rolling those out and delivering those things that work at scale across the region. So I think the key message here is TFSE needs to evolve from a strategy to a delivery body. It needs to develop its capability and capacity to do that. And I think basing that on existing strengths of that collaborative stakeholder engagement approach and the really good quality data and evidence is important. And if you do those, I think that will enable you to develop a clear strategic investment plan that will deliver the objectives of the transport strategy. So that's the end of a presentation. A quick run through of our findings. As I said, the report will be delivered shortly to back that up and provide more details behind the recommendations. But we welcome any questions or comments just so we can take on board your feedback.
Thank you. An awful lot to take in there, and it'd be really good to see the report, but we can take some early questions or comments. I think there was one sentence in there that summed up for me what we're about, and that is leading the coordination of this, as opposed to leading the delivery. Might be a step too far, but we need to see the evidence that sits behind that. I'm struggling to see the hands. Can somebody help me with that, please? Daniel?
Thanks. And I agree exactly. Can you hear me clearly? You can hear me. Good. So I agree exactly with what you just said. And I just wanted to get a little more clarification from Stephen on what you mean by that, by delivery. Because we definitely deliver a strategy. We definitely have the potential to be leaders in this space with the strategy. But how far into operations does delivery go?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I'm happy to clarify on that. And I think initially, I mean by delivery, I mean that sort of coordination and working with partners on delivery. So I think the important thing is TFSE making that case to government, identifying the priorities, making the case for funding and investment. So that is flowing through. Now, when that comes to the region, it may not be TFSE that delivers the scheme on the ground, and it probably won't be. It will be either the local authorities or the bodies like Network Rail and National Highways. So I see those being the actually physically delivering schemes. But I think I see the role of TFSE in securing the investment, identifying the priorities, and really making that case. I think as a number of stakeholders did feedback to us that in the longer term, there's potential for TFSE to be involved as a delivery body, but I think that's a bit further down the line as we stand at the moment.
Can I add to that, Stephen? I think it's important to bear in mind the type of intervention we're talking about as well, because I think our minds automatically go to a highway scheme or something to do with a railway, but actually, in the stuff that TFSE has already done around future mobility and the freight strategy, there are lots of region-wide things that could be delivered by TFSE that are a bit softer almost. So as an example, for future mobility, TFSE could come up with some sort of coordinated approach to e-scooters in the biggest towns of the region, or some big things like that that function better at a regional level. So less in terms of delivery of I guess shovels in the ground interventions, perhaps more so, bigger, broader things like the one that I mentioned.
So it's strategy and a strategic plan.
So yeah, I mean that's the fundamental, delivering the strategy and strategic plan for sure.
Thank you.
Are there any other hands up? Tony, have you got your hand up?
Yes, thanks, Keith, and thanks for the presentation. You and I have obviously had a separate briefing about this, but I just wanted to pick up on the statutory status issue, which obviously has to be kept under constant review. The most important next step will obviously be to see what, if anything, there is in this much delayed white paper. Because clearly I agree with the current recommendation that we put that on the back burner or tread water, whatever metaphor you prefer. But some of us long-standing cynics and observers of central government relations have no expectations about any devolution element in the forthcoming white paper, genuinely devolved powers. But if, underline if, there were to be, and SNTBs featured in some intellectually coherent proposal, again, an unlikely chance at the moment, but then we would obviously need to review our position. So I would just emphasise that in any presentation, I think we should say, Keith, that this is all to be kept under review, and that once the white paper emerges, we will then have a better idea as to what the agenda is. There may be an open door, there may be a firmly closed door, and we can then respond as TFSE on whether or not we want to activate or reactivate some more lobbying around statutory status. I'm satisfied with what is being said there, but I just think for purposes of the next stage of the dialogue internally, we need to have the white paper in front of us and obviously assess the implications, discuss with our advisors and officers, and then see whether there's anything in it for us. But other than that, I thought it was a good presentation and a very fair summary of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. If I may just comment on that, I think you're right. There's a bit of a mixed picture at the moment. We're hearing that devolution isn't flavour of the month at the moment. Yet we're also seeing, DFT reaching out to the STBs to really help, on some of their issues around, buses, on electric vehicles and so on. So it's a little bit mixed. And I think, I'd hope, as you say, it's not certain, but I hope there will be some clarity on that going forward. What I would say is that I think, TFSE to date has had the influence it's had from the really good quality of work that's been done in terms of developing the strategy and the data and evidence behind that. And I think that stands for a lot. And I think if you can continue to maintain that quality of work, with the data and evidence to back it up, to show that there's been a wide range of consultation engagement supporting it, that goes a long way to having influence with government.
Thank you, and I agree, Tony. We will keep it on the agenda. As you know, the opportunity will arise, just when, and we'll be ready for that. Ian, and then Jeff, please.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, that really follows on from Tony's point and your response just now. To what extent do you think TFSE is actually influencing the agenda at present, both up and down to government and to local authorities and other actors in the transportation and communications sector? And to what extent do you think that would be enhanced by statutory status? Have you addressed that as part of your review?
I think certainly, I've seen in the transport industry in the last couple of years, the role of regional transport bodies really increasing, and the recognition of them. And as I said, I think the quality of work really helps with that. I think, with statutory status, it will help, as I said in the presentation, but it's not essential right now. But I think as you move into the SIP, production and that gets submitted, and you want to start going to delivery, I think that's a time when, if the signs are positive, you want to move into to looking at statutory status. I think one thing, perhaps reading between the lines, a lot of stakeholder bodies, particularly the kind of the national level ones like National Highways and Network Rail, they're quite comfortable with the arrangement at the moment, so they're very positive. But there is a sense that they still have the kind of upper hand as a statutory body, because so they'll take on board your views, but whether those will always be respected, it remains to be seen. So I think it is worth considering that statutory status in future to have the influence for delivery that you might want.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I'm just really building on those last few comments as well. I think, obviously, from what your report, Stephen, that TFSE is in a reasonably good place, but it's in a reasonably good place because it has reacted to things and it has acted upon things to get into that place. And the one thing we mustn't do is now say, well, that's us fixed and we know what we're going to do for the next X years and won't review it. Other opportunities will come up, other issues will emerge, be it decarbonisation, road pricing, lots of things. And I think we've got to maintain that outward-looking aspect to make sure we are responding to the challenges as they come up, rather than sticking with what we've decided up to now.
Yeah, and I would comment, that's a really good point, Jeff, because TFSE's got to where it's got to through a lot of hard work and through a great approach for that engagement and the data and evidence. I think that won't be enough in future. I think pretty much everybody in this room is judged on, or will be judged on, the delivery of that transport strategy. And so it's important that role keeps evolving. So it's a really good point that, we can't just rest on our laurels and say we've done a great job, got a great transport strategy out there. I think it's that evolution into then delivering what's in the transport strategy, is challenging. Hopefully we've set out a bit of a roadmap to do that, but it is important to keep evolving.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And just before I come to Daniel, I mean, I would just add to the fact that I don't think anyone thinks that we are resting on our laurels. There's more to do. And what status or how we held in esteem by others. I think the fact that we've come to an agenda item later where DfT are asking us to do 4 or bid for 4 pieces of work shows that actually we do have a place on the stage currently. We just need to reinforce that stage. And the reason I went back to the delivery stroke coordinating role earlier was I really, I'm just doing around the organisation meetings, and what I'm really clear about is that TFSE's role is coordinating the delivery of, not the delivering of, and it's only playing on words, but it's really important that we all understand that at this stage in life, I don't see us going out there with bulldozers or paint cans or whatever, but actually, if that's what's needed, we will back up and provide the evidence that sits behind enabling whoever is the appropriate person to do that. And I'm sorry that sounds a bit negative, but it's very clear to me that we do have a really good role, and we should focus and function on the fact that we've been good at what we are at and build on that. I'm not saying as I say, forever. When we get to the SIP position, we may be in a totally different place, but for now, I'll just add that bit. And sorry, Daniel, I've stopped you coming in.
No, that's not, because actually, again, I agree wholeheartedly with what you've just said, because the role as a coordinator and a facilitator and a strategic leader, I believe, is more important than the delivery. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do the delivery or enable the delivery, as you just said. But that wasn't my point. My point was going to be in terms of achieving what we want to, and that point about bringing organisations together and demonstrating that leadership through strategy. How do you see the organisation reshaping? Because if we've got endorsement from the local authorities and we're perceived to be doing good things for them, and we're sitting well between them and central government, there's another element which is industry, and so with my LEP hat firmly out on. Should we not be involving industry more in what we do and in terms of shaping the strategy and then leading towards execution?
Yeah, that's it.
Sorry. I'll just add my bit first.
Yeah, sure.
The way it's currently set up is, whilst we know that there is a LEP review on, the link to business has always been there through the LEPs. Hence, we have 2 LEP members on the board and 5 LEPs involved. But as we go forward, the point you make about how do we connect with industry needs to be there. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, yeah, it's a good question about the organisation, and I think there is a gradual evolution to grow some of the skills and functions within TFSE, as we showed in the slides. I think there's a very small number of officers doing a fantastic job at the moment, but as you move forward, there's a lot more to do and some different skills. So it will be important to grow organically, which I don't think so. It's not completely revolutionary change, but it's a gradual growth in line with as the functions expand. On the private sector point, I think it's interesting because we have to be realistic. The southeast isn't the top priority for investment with government at the moment. I think the levelling up doesn't always mean north v south. I think it means more deprived areas and improving on equality amongst different areas, and I think we can show that that's an important priority for the southeast as well. But I think being realistic, we're not going to secure massive amount of government funding in infrastructure for the southeast, which means we really need to be clever about where the funding and financing comes from, and I think that means engaging the private sector and really focusing on the wider benefits of infrastructure and improved connectivity for delivering things like housing, for delivering investment, for delivering things like corporate headquarters across the southeast. And I think if we can do that and show the benefits to the private sector, it means we can get them involved in projects and hopefully investing in projects and the wider benefits of those.
Thank you. Rupert.
Thanks, Keith. I think one of the bits I would add is, of course, we have a private sector group that we work with, that we tested both the strategy, and we're talking to them exactly about the points that Stephen's raised, funding and financing. You know, we know that funding is going to be tricky. In fact, the spending review settlement we know is going to be tight. But going forward and trying to help us achieve that 30-year ambition, we're not going to be able to do it just with public sector funding alone. You know, we need to understand what are the avenues for drawing in private sector funding. And I think there's a number of things that are happening currently that give the potential to generate revenue streams to enable the private sector to invest in what has traditionally been publicly funded infrastructure. That's not to say there's not going to be we're not going to need a large check from the public sector for infrastructure. But I think when we land that SIP, exactly why we're using this private sector group, is to come up with credible options for private sector funding to support the investment in the South East.
Can I say something there then? Because there's a very good example that the EM3 LEP is conducting with a gigabit link, which effectively will be almost totally private sector funded, because there's a prospect of a return on the investment in a timely manner. Given that we're talking about making this region as efficient as possible, not necessarily getting public sector funding in, but efficiency through transport, through links from capital to coast and from coast to the Midlands, there's a lot of opportunity through transport and telecommunications alone to get the private sector to participate in what we're trying to shape.
Absolutely right. All I say to you is, as I've said before, nobody has the God-given right to think that they're the person for any of this. But actually, working together, we are much stronger. And hopefully, when those bids and bits and pieces come together, you'll be using the Transport for the South East to back that up, which is the purpose of us being here, because the one voice is the bit that sells us. I promise you. Those ministers and secretaries of state, if they could get that in any other way, they probably wouldn't be quite so excited. I go back to why they think it's a good value operation. Apart from all the really good work that we do, they come to us because they actually recognise that we've put the effort into getting that one voice right. And if we do nothing else, that's something we've got to continue to work on. Any other hands up? Is there another hand up there or not?
No, that's just gone.
No, all seem to be covered. Well, hopefully that was helpful and not too destructive of a really good piece of work that you've put together. And we look forward to receiving the report. And does it go to the board? It comes to the board in January for an approval or whatever. But again, thank you on behalf of all of us for the work you've put in so far. And hopefully we'll continue to work together.
Thank you. And we've really enjoyed working with the organisation, and thank you to everybody who's engaged. You know, this was really based on the feedback and engagement we had with the stakeholders. So thank you to everybody for the time and input to the study.
Agreed. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all. Okay. So what are we asked to do there? We're just a discussion, and that'll come, as I say, come back to the January board. So that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. So we go on to agenda item 7, which is lead officer's report. And Rupert, you're going to introduce, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This just picks up the period between July and October. Just a couple of aspects I'd like to pull out of the report. The first is the initial meeting that we've had with the Great British Railways transition team. So that's the start of our engagement with that team, who's going to be looking at the future of both Network Rail and train operating companies. So you'll remember from the William Shapps review that key ambition was to remove, or bring closer rather, operator and infrastructure provider. And we're starting to have some technical discussions with them about the whole industry strategic plan, which will set out some of the strategic direction for rail as we go forward. So we think that's a really important component. We've touched upon this already, but the 4 work streams that the DfT have asked STBs, subnational transport bodies, to work on: decarbonisation, electric vehicle infrastructure, capacity and capability, and bus back better. And the DfT wrote to local transport authorities to say that they have asked STBs to put their heads together and think about how we can add value, and we'll touch upon that a bit later on. We've also had and signed up a joint engagement and action plan with National Highways, and I think that's quite helpful in setting out how we'll work together for mutually beneficial outcomes. And if you look at the transport strategy and the strategic investment plan when it comes, that is effectively going to be setting out some of the strategic investment that's needed over the next 30 years. And so that relationship with National Highways is quite crucial and quite important. And particularly at this stage, taking account of each other's strategies and plans. We've seen a couple of ministerial changes following the reshuffle. So Rachel McLean has moved on, but we're still keeping Baroness Veer as the STB ministerial sponsor. And then one to watch, I think it's going to be quite interesting, is the Transport Select Committee that's coming up. I think the first set of oral evidence is on the 20th of October around road pricing. I think that's quite topical at the moment. A number of media outlets ran stories about it at the weekend. And that has the potential to be quite an important component of the transport decarbonisation plan. And then everybody's talking about COP26 and the implications that might have. I think it's probably reasonable to expect further policy directions coming out of the department, potentially as we go into COP and certainly out the other side. But I'll stop there, Chairman. I have to take any questions.
Thank you, Rupert. Are there any questions for Rupert? Comments? I don't see any hands going up. None? Okay, so we'll go on then to the comprehensive spending review. Rupert, is that you or Mark?
Yeah, I'll kick off, Chairman, and then I'll bring Mark in to talk about the funding proposals for the 4 additional work streams. So the purpose of this report is to seek the board's agreement to a multi-year funding submission to the DFT. And board members will be acutely aware that we have been successful and grateful for grant funding that we've had year on year, but it is a bit hand to mouth. And the spending review gives us an opportunity to seek a long-term funding settlement or a multi-year funding settlement to help us deliver both the technical programme and to start thinking about how we support some of the strategic outline business case and the business case work that we're inevitably going to need in order to get that pipeline of schemes going. So members and certainly local authority members will be acutely aware of this, that the spending review will be announced on the 27th of October alongside the autumn budget. So that not only will give or at least hint at what local government finance settlement is, but also what STBs are likely to get. I think it's fair to say that there are 7 STBs across the country, all at varying stages of development. And my understanding is that the DFT hopes to secure funding to support all 7 STBs. And although the spending review will be announced on the 27th of October, I think it's probably fair to say that we won't be 100% sure what allocation STBs will get. We might be lucky before Christmas, but the reality is it might be after Christmas. But nonetheless, I think it's crucial that we submit a multi-year funding bid. There's the draft bid is attached to Appendix 1 in your documents, but it effectively sets out our ambition, importantly sets out what we've achieved, and we've already touched upon some of that in the previous items. How we can support DFT priorities, recognising that STBs aren't arm's length bodies from the DFT, but in terms of our ambitions, they're very, very similarly aligned. And we want to support the department in delivering some of their ambitions. And again, I touched upon the requirements that the DFT set out for us to provide bids for those 4 work streams, which I'll ask Mark to touch upon in a minute. It's an ambitious funding request, that for sure. But I think if we are going to move the agenda forward, start to be able to land the work that's needed to really deliver the SIP, then the spending review that's set out in your appendix is quite crucial. So I'll pause there, Chairman, and perhaps bring Mark in to pick up the 4 workstream areas.
Yes, please, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Rupert. Yes, so just put up a slide here which summarises the 4 work streams where DFT have come forward to us and asked us to develop proposals to make use of some in-year funding that they found. So this is funding that's available for the for this year 21-22, covering 4 work areas. You can see there in the first column on the left-hand side, around decarbonisation, bus back better, EV charging, EV infrastructure strategy, and local authority capability. I must say in opening, a key theme of the use of this funding, there are two key components which DFT were anxious to emphasise, which is about using this money where we can to level up between local authorities. So this is very much about helping those local transport authorities who have gaps that need filling, to fill those gaps, necessarily them helping the better to get the best to get even better. So a key theme. Just looking across the proposals that we've got in terms of the funding that's available, we've been given some planning guidelines of across the first 3 work areas that we're to submit proposals around about the 100,000 mark per STB, and for the last one around local authority capability about 200,000. So these are planning guidelines that we've been given. But as you can see on the column on the right-hand side, what we're proposing to do for some of these proposals is join together with some of the other STBs to submit joint proposals, because I think this is another aspect of this work that DFT were anxious to see, which is STBs coming together, either sharing methodologies or jointly procuring work to get better value from what we're doing. And you will see that in that column on the right hand side, there are some proposals where we're just proposing to put in a TFSE bid, but there are others where we're proposing to either join up with Transport East and England's Economic Heartlands, which are the 2 STBs, obviously Economic Heartlands to the north of London and Transport East covering Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. And there are 2 there where we're proposing to go in jointly with joint proposal across all 7. So sort of a key theme here about making better use of the money that's available. So just quickly running through, and I can take detailed questions if members have them about the proposal. So on decarbonisation, we have 2 proposals being submitted, which kind of interrelate. The first one is about undertaking a stock take of the existing tools that are starting to emerge that help local authorities identify the potential impacts of different interventions they might think about introducing in their areas on carbon reduction. So we all know that we need to reduce carbon. The question is, if we do certain things, what levels of carbon reduction are we likely to see? With the idea that what we're trying to do is to come up and suggest to DFT that there should be a common method of measurement that we should all be using. If resources are to be allocated as we understand in the future on the basis of commitments to decarbonisation, then I think really important that we all try and come together and agree a common measure. So that work is very much looking into the potential to do that. Based on building on that more locally, a joint proposal, the second one with England's Economic and Transport East, about actually developing a tool which would enable a local transport authority thinking about the development of its local transport plan, what potential impact on carbon reductions, different packages of interventions they might be thinking about introducing in a place in their geography would have on carbon reduction. So it's not about, this is to be clear, not about the detail of 250 metres of bus lane on a particular road leading to X million megatons of carbon reduction. This is more about thinking about a place, if I was to introduce a package of active travel measures, some bus priority, some potential changes to my parking policies in that area, what levels of carbon reduction would I be likely to see? So we believe that would be a useful tool for local transport authorities. On the Bus Back Better work, a joint proposal with Transport East and England's economic heartlands, looking very much at following the BSIPs, the bus service improvement plans that local transport authorities have been very, very busy introducing. Once those have gone in at the end of October, looking and going out to our local transport authorities to say what further technical work or capability or joint working across the region would be a benefit for them moving forward, having submitted their first BSIPs, and then looking to prioritise the requests or the suggestions that come in to deliver some packages of work that will help, particularly with the delivery of the second round of BSIPs. On the EV charging infrastructure, DFT have been a little bit more prescriptive here about what they're looking for from us, which is to develop regional EV charging infrastructure strategies, building on the good work that some local transport authorities have already done to identify locations for EV charging infrastructure, but trying to develop a regional picture. There are places obviously where there are gaps and where more work is needed to develop a comprehensive network of EV charging infrastructure that will ensure that those people using their EVs have a comprehensive network that gets over this issue of range anxiety. Also through that work, looking to liaise with the energy providers and also understand better what role the private sector has in the delivery of EV charging infrastructure in the future, trying to coordinate the public and private activity here. But so that's a TFSE only proposal. Under the local authority capability, we're hopeful that this funding that's available for just this year will continue into future years and potentially increase, because what DFT are looking for STBs to do here is develop regional centres of excellence that provide capability that will help local transport authorities in the delivery of their own work locally. So this could be specific help in business case development, LTP formulation, and other work streams that we want to identify through a dialogue with our local transport authorities about what their needs are and how they could be better provided through a regional centre of excellence. And the last one, a slightly technical issue, is about developing a common analytical framework amongst all of the 7 STBs. I'm sure members will be familiar that an important part of the process of making the case for a large scale or any intervention is the production of a business case, which relies on technical input, modelling, data to provide the numbers to support the case for the investment. And what we're trying to do with the other STBs is develop a common way of doing that. So we're all working from a common, singing to a common hymn sheet, if you like, rather than us all doing slightly different things. So that the purpose of that proposal is to start work on the development of that common analytical framework, which all STBs would then look to enhance and develop within their own geographies. So that's just a quick run through of the various proposals that we've got in. The deadline for submission is this Wednesday. We've only had 6 weeks from the announcement to getting these proposals pulled together and submitted. And happy to take any questions from members about any of the detail.
Thank you. Before we do that, I've got Rupert, and then Carly's on the call. I don't know if there's anything she wanted to add after Rupert. If not, we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Chair. I just remind the board again that we are quite fortunate and very grateful for the local authority contributions that are made. I think not every STB has local authority contributions, as you know, but I do think that puts us in a strong position with the department when it comes to seeking that multi-year funding settlement. I think it is an ambitious proposal in Appendix 1, no question about it, in terms of the programme costs, the resources that are needed to support those programme costs, and then the business case development. But I think we touched upon this earlier on. When we think about the context of levelling up, both the Midlands and the North are highly dependent on connectivity in the South East. And we know that through the movement of ports at Southampton and at Dover and at Gatwick. And although outside of our geography, Heathrow has a major bearing in relation to surface transport. And so the arguments are strong for us to put in a comprehensive multi-year funding settlement to ensure that the funding is there to drive that strategic investment and to drive that strategic investment plan to enable not just the South East to level up, but also the rest of the country. So, Chairman, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Carly, was there anything you wanted to add, or are you happy with what's been said?
I'm very happy with what's been said. I think I'll just add we're really, really grateful for all the help and support that has been given to us to make the case for funding for TFSE and indeed for other STBs actually. And as Rupert said, it might take a little bit of time post-budget to sort of clarify exact amounts as we work through everything as a department, but we will share as much as we can as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for attending again today. So I've got Lynn and then Tony.
Yes, as far as the EV infrastructure strategy is concerned, does that also involve working with manufacturers in order to have compatibility of the actual charging points themselves? Because I believe different manufacturers have got different methods. So it's okay if you're local and you can find another charging point, but if you're going cross country, for example, and you've got a particular vehicle and there's no charging point between you and your destination, I realise this goes beyond TFSE, that it's cross country, but I just wondered what was going on.
I'll ask Mark to answer that. I'm sure you've got the answer.
Yes, that will be a component of the work, but as you've identified, Councillor Stad, this is a universal problem about trying to get some of these common standards that ensure that anybody with an EV vehicle can use any piece of charging infrastructure as much as possible. So it's a common, an issue that everyone is trying to grapple with and would be part of the work that we're proposing to undertake.
Thank you. That's reassuring.
Tony.
Thank you. I must confess I'm left a bit confused following Mark's introduction. So on the issue of the bid for local capacity and capability, paragraph 3.16 says the value of the bid is 180 with an additional proposal for a further 100. So that's 280,000, but I think Mark said the bid would be only for 200. Now, 200 doesn't buy you a great deal, spread between 5 counties and 9 unitaries. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's going to be spread either evenly or amongst all of them, but the issue of capacity and capability for all authorities is a severe one. There were pressures pre-pandemic, but with the pandemic, many of us have switched resources to more immediate tasks. Responding to all the active travel stuff, for example, has shifted all the staff that I had working on the final versions of our local transport plan. That's now been paused until next year because of all the active travel. And we've received some of the highest per capita funding for active travel in the country. And we've got, therefore, real pressure on meeting the timetables for delivery. So there is a very real issue around that. And I would have wanted to put a note on that in terms of that bid, in terms of getting additional support around capacity and capability. And I don't know to what extent there have even been discussions yet with our member transport authorities. I recognise the timescale's been very tight. So is the nature of this bid just a sort of confirming that there's a need for this service and we'll come back to you with more detail, in which case I think that figure is very low. I mean, obviously one appreciates any help, but even in full-time equivalent staff, it probably doesn't buy you more than what, 3 or 4, if depending on what level. So that's the first question. And around the issue of support, you mentioned bus service improvement plans and also working with other SNTBs. Sitting on the northern border, with a county that doesn't believe that anybody in its southern area actually travels out of the county into Berkshire, I have enormous difficulties with that then knocking through to an SNTB that also turns its back on the southern boundary. And this is an issue, and the A34, the A4074 being used as a heavy goods vehicle rat run through Reading, through Wokingham, through Bracknell, when they should be on the A34 or the M4 or both. The failure of that SNTB to engage with the southern realities, as I call it, is still as great now as it was before the pandemic. And I, for one, am getting, if you pardon the French, Keith, pissed off with all their declarations of joint working, which palpably do not extend to our area on the northern frontier of TFSE. So, and I'm glad the DFT are present on this call, because anything you can do to remind Oxfordshire that a great chunk of their people actually work in Reading and work in Bracknell and work in Wokingham and also want to travel there, and that we don't have a Berlin Wall running down the middle of the Thames, would be appreciated. Around that capacity working, there's a question, and also this team working, Mark, we're very good at it. No criticism of you or your colleagues, but they are bloody awful. You know, I love him dearly. He's now gone up to TFN as their director, or what's his name, Martin Tugwell. But, you know, he was bloody awful when it came to recognising the issues to the south of their area. So, anyway, discuss. Thank you, Chair.
I'll come to Rupert. Just remind you, I'm sitting in a council chamber here, and I've got one of the local councillors who's a bit concerned about the language you're using now. So,
oh, I'm terribly sorry. Well, it could be far worse.
Yeah. I've noticed the hand of friendship towards our colleagues in the north. I'll leave Rupert to deal with it.
Thank you, Chair. On the capability and capacity, Tony, I think the way which you've described is absolutely right. It's a bit of there's a recognition from the DFT that there are some capability and capacity challenges. We're having discussions with them about, you know, the scale of what you get for the money that you've described. When we drafted the report, we subsequently agreed this joint work, which is a 200 plus the 20k. So that's where it's, I think, slightly confusing. But the point is that the scale of the intervention needed to provide the right level of support is, as you say, more significant than is set out. But we are having those ongoing discussions. And then your point on freight and you know, movements between some national transport body areas. We do have a strong working relationship with England's economic heartland. I recognise that, you know, we can do much to improve that, particularly around the issues of freight. And you know, we'll have a think about the Oxfordshire conundrum that you've just spoken about.
Can I just say, Keith, yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Rupert, I mean, the trouble is that we the discussions get bedeviled around the controversial proposal for a third Thames crossing, which TFSE has been very supportive of. But unfortunately, Oxfordshire see it all in that light, and the wider debate and the needs simply get parked as a result. So, but thanks for that clarification. Sorry to cut across you, Rob.
Do you want to add to that, Mark, before I bring Rob in?
Yeah, just to emphasise the point that we know that some of the other STBs are not bidding under some of these work streams, hence that sort of speculative additional money that we added on. So if you like, to sweep up if some of the other STBs didn't. But I think the other point is that we have some signals that this capability and capacity funding will continue into future years. I think it's dependent on what the outcome of the CSR is, but I know that DFT are trying to ensure that resources are available for future years, and hopefully a much, as you've identified, we need more significant funding if we're to do a good job under this thing, but we'll have to await the CSR outcome to know quite how things have panned out on that front.
Thank you, Mark. Rob.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm quite pleased to have not been invited to Tony's Christmas party. I'm not sure it'll be a joyous event, but you know that's up to him. And just for the purposes of who you have in the room, I know Tony's very knowledgeable, very passionate, and I know he doesn't always quite mean what he says, but I know he has great knowledge, and I respect him for that. So just to sort of help you with that a little bit, Tony. What I'm interested in is in the Bus Back Better and the B6. It's really for Mark in terms of how we work across all the, I suppose, transport authorities and how we bring that together. At Hampshire, we are working and have been helping with Portsmouth, Southampton, and indeed the Isle of Wight as well. And I'm wondering, potentially, is there a further opportunity to some of us to actually help with that process? You know, it's all about collaboration, working together, partnerships and everything else. And I suppose I'm doing it in sort of a measured way that maybe we could, as I meet quite regularly with all the bus MDs, and if there's some involvement that we could perhaps help from Hampshire's point of view there to bring some of that together, not to do it for everybody, but just sort of try and make sure we join those dots up. I don't know, Keith, it's just sort of something that I thought maybe we could perhaps help with.
I'm sure Mark will be right. Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. That us helping ourselves has got to be a great way forward. If there's expertise in a particular part of the geography that can be rolled out and others can benefit from, then I think the work that we're going to do in coming out to the local authorities and asking what it is capability they have and what they could share and what people would benefit from hearing about that other local authorities have been done, maybe sharing experience, maybe even sharing personnel. In the way that you've done in the Solent area, that provides a model that yes, absolutely, we could consider rolling out to the rest of the geography. Yeah.
Okay, so Mark, I think Frank's on the call. That may be a conversation you'd have with the officer team and maybe with Frank at some point. Yeah, great. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Daniel. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a small point. It sounds like that kind of bundle of work is very much aligned with what DFT is doing in one particular area. I know we're hearing about the Transport Technology Forum later on, but just that fourth area about local authority capability and kind of creating some consistency, that will be extremely valuable to the forum, I know for a fact. So if it isn't in the proposal already, I'd encourage reinforcing that to Anthony Ferguson and his colleagues within the DFT, drawing their attention to it and making sure that they fully appreciate what we're offering them, because I think it will be valuable to them. And I'm sure there are other groups within DFT that would embrace in a similar way.
Thank you, John.
Not a question, just a statement.
Mark, do you want to add anything to that?
I think we're clear on that one.
I see no more hands up, so hopefully we've covered that one. So you see the recommendations there. We're asked to agree a multi-year funding bid for submission to the Department of Transport and to agree funding proposals for the additional 4 work streams. Are we all happy to do that? Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
So we come to agenda item 9, which is the financial update. And Rachel, I think you're going to help us.
Thank you, Chair. This is a short report to present the financial update at the end of Q2. As updated at previous board meetings, we successfully obtained 1.225 million from the Department for Transport this year, in addition to the 500,000 from our constituent authorities. And as Rupert's mentioned, we're incredibly grateful for the fact that we have received that money. And with the money that was carried forward from the previous year, that gave us an operating budget of just over 3.2 million. The main elements of the proposed expenditure related to the delivery of the technical programme, and as outlined in Appendix 1, expenditure to date at the end of Q2 was just under £800,000. Just to highlight a couple of areas from that, staffing costs are running slightly lower than they were expected to be at this point in the year, and that's down to the vacancies within the team. So the fact that we had our communications manager vacant for a couple of months, as we've heard, that's now been filled, and we also have a strategy manager post which is vacant as well. So the end of year forecast in Appendix 1's been revised to reflect those lower costs. You can see that from the technical programme side of things, we have spent more than 471,000 so far. That's mainly focused on the 5 area studies, the future mobility strategy and the freight logistics and international gateway study. And we're confident that we're on track to spend around about 1.8 million by the end of March next year. In terms of the operational costs and communications and engagement activities, we are slightly lower than anticipated in those areas at the minute, but we are expecting that they will increase in the second half of the year with increased communications and engagement activity associated with the strategic investment plan and a return to face-to-face meetings and event attendance later in the year. So the recommendation of the report is that board members are asked to note the financial position at the end of Q2, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions?
Not from me.
Nothing in the room? No. Okay, well, thank you for that. Then we will note the report. Move on to agenda item 10, which is the area study progress update. And Sarah, I think you're going to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to provide a progress update on the 5 area studies. So just as a reminder, the area studies are very much sort of trying to identify where geographically, when in time and under what conditions packages of scheme interventions and wider policy initiatives should be implemented across the South East to deliver that 2050 vision that we set out in our transport strategy. So all 5 studies are currently underway. The last 2 that started following the award of funding this financial year have now completed their evidence base and are into the stage where they start to identify long lists of potential interventions for assessment. The inner orbital and the south central studies are nearing the end of that assessment process, and the outer orbital study has actually completed that process, and we now have some emerging short lists of packages of interventions that are coming out of that study. The, where each study is in the progress is shown in Appendix A in the report. In addition to location-specific interventions, this process has also identified a number of wider policy interventions that in general would apply across a large part, if not all, of the TFSE area. And we've started to term these global policy interventions. With the global policy interventions, they have been assessed separately against their own sort of framework that measures against the transport strategy as a whole, rather than against the specific objectives that were developed for each of the 5 areas. As we've been doing this work, it's very much coming to light that we need to bring together the 5 geographic areas much sooner in the process than we had initially envisaged. I think looking back now, those 5 areas were largely arbitrary. And as we are going through the technical work, we're very much getting sort of strong narratives that are coming out that don't necessarily reflect those somewhat arbitrary boundaries that we set just over a year ago. Also, the thinking on how the strategic investment plan will come about has evolved in recent months, and there's a much clearer idea now how the outputs from the area studies need to feed into the development of the forthcoming SIP. For those reasons, we're having a bit of a rethink of the methodology for the last stage of the area study work. Rather than developing and preparing a separate strategic programme outline case, an area plan and a delivery plan for each individual geographic study, we're now looking to see how we can present the work in a much more streamlined way, focusing instead around the strong narratives that have emerged from the technical work and also reflecting how the area studies work needs to be presented in the SIP. So a timescale for showing the timescales for the work is shown in Appendix 2. In terms of stakeholder engagement for the area studies, we've been very grateful for the partaking of coming to working groups with the technical officers from our meetings, from our constituent authorities. And those meetings have continued. We've rationalised them as we go to try and bring them more focused and less regular for attendees to have to come to. We've also been holding area study forums for each of the studies with our wider stakeholder group. And again, we've had some very good engagement from those stakeholders. The outer orbital study is nearing the point where we had initially assumed we would have had the last forum of our wider stakeholder group. However, for the reasons outlined above about needing to consider the work together as the 5 studies as a whole rather than just one, we're looking to postpone that engagement until the spring of next year when we've had the chance to bring all the work together. In terms of the emerging outputs, we're also looking to set up some meetings that follow on, Chair, from your world tour, as we call it, in order to share with the board members the emerging packages of interventions that are coming out in their areas and to gain, obviously, their input into the technical work that's coming out as a part of it. So the board is recommended to note the work undertaken to date and the progress made with the area study programme, and a further progress update will be presented at the January meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to say, we are nearly there with our first round of meetings, but the second round are the important ones that Sarah's just talking about, where we will talk more specifically about intervention. So I look forward to seeing you all again very soon on those. Are there any questions or comments on the area studies? Bob?
Sorry, is that me? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, no, just I think you've heard me mention several times. I've always been slightly concerned how we joined all these up, and I was given, very good responses on how they eventually would be. So I'm actually pleased to see that these have been brought together, perhaps at an earlier stage, because that's the whole point of us doing it right across the southeast, and actually being joined up. So we take that overall approach. So it was really just a comment to say I'm very pleased to hear the report and how that is now going to proceed. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that comment. I mean, it is good that we can bring them all in one spot. So, any other comments, questions? No one in the room? No? Thank you very much, Sarah. So, members of partners are recommended to note. So we've noted the report. Thank you very much for that. 11 is working towards the strategic investment plan. Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a lot about the strategic investment plan today, and the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the procurement exercise that we've undertaken recently. The strategic investment plan is intended to be the blueprint for investment in strategic transport infrastructure for the next 30 years. And as we've discussed, it will need to make the strong case for investment in the South East to government. As part of the strategic investment plan, we are planning to undertake a considerable programme of stakeholder engagement. We will be considering funding and financing routes, and we will be presenting the packages of interventions that arise from the area studies, as we've just heard from Sarah. At the previous board meeting, it was agreed that responsibility for the procurement exercise would be delegated to the lead officer in consultation with the chair. We have gone through the process of putting out a request for quotation following the East Sussex County Council procurement rules, and we issued a brief at the beginning of September. Members from the senior officer group were invited to form part of the procurement panel and have been involved in the scoring process and interviews. We issued the RFQ to a total of 8 consultants, and we received 2 quotations back by the deadline of the 22nd of September. We've recently held clarification interviews with the bidders, and we have reached the point where we have offered the contract to one of those bidders. Unfortunately, we are still in the standstill period at the minute, but I should be able to make an announcement within the coming week about who has been successfully appointed to that position. So members of the Partnership Board are recommended to note the progress on the procurement of the SIP and to note that they will receive a further update on this in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions or comments? Again, moving forward, just a few more days to go. None? Right. So we will note the recommendations to note, so that's good. Technical programme progress update, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is just to give an update on 4 aspects of the technical work programme that's currently underway, which is the freight logistics and gateway strategy, the work we're doing on Bus Back Better, the development of the future mobility strategy, and the ongoing work we have on decarbonisation. So just on the freight logistics and gateway strategy, members will remember that we when we came to with the progress update in July, the intention was to bring a draft of the freight logistics and gateway strategy to this board meeting for members to approve. However, there have been some issues with the development of the technical work and the drafting of the necessary technical reports and the strategy, such that we're not able to bring that draft strategy to you today for approval. We will have to defer that until the January meeting. On Bus Back Better, as we've already heard in the meeting, local transport authorities have been furiously developing their bus service improvement plans for submission to the DFT at the end of October. We've been commissioned some work to look at the development of an evidence base across the southeast that supports the ambition for the future development of the bus services across the region. Very much we appreciate that many of the BSIPs have had to focus on ensuring the continuation of the services that are currently provided, whereas I think DFT are anxious to hear about the future of buses and what greater role the bus could play in providing for people's mobility, particularly in the context of the decarbonisation challenge. So we have some work ongoing to identify what that potential is, particularly feeding into our area studies work where the bus has a strong emerging role. We're not going to be able to get that work complete to feed into these first round of BSIPs, which is slightly disappointing for us. I think the fact that STBs weren't referenced in the Bus Back Better strategy when it originally came out sort of delayed us getting a start on this. I think if we'd have had a little bit more of a leg up in the strategy document, we could have got this on the ground and got this work on going such that it was ready for use in each of the individual local transport authorities BSIPs. But we definitely think it will be of value in the preparation of the second round of BSIPs, this whole issue about the future ambition for the role of bus services. On the future mobility work, we brought a copy of the final strategy, future mobility strategy, to the July meeting, which members approved. What that strategy had an action plan, and what we're just doing is commissioning further work to take forward some of the actions that are set out in the action plan. So actually getting on with the implementation. That broadly consists of 3 activities, which is undertaking some workshops with the local transport authorities to better understand how the strategy can be implemented in their geography. What has the strategy had to say about the development of future mobility in those particular geographies, and how can each local transport authority take its recommendations forward? Reconvening the future mobility forum that we set up and keeping that moving as we move forward through the implementation phase. Looking for potential future piloting activities. So we have the future transport zone in the Solent, which is piloting a number of different future mobility interventions, but it's looking to see within the geography, is there an appetite for, particularly from private sector providers, for further piloting work to try out some of the new and emerging ideas in other parts of the Tfse area. And then finally, just looking to use some of the technical work that went into the development of the strategy, a lot of technical work to develop that piece of work. Could we turn that into a tool which would be of use to local transport authorities when thinking about their own geography, about which future mobility interventions are going to work best in their particular locations? Just lastly, on decarbonisation, we've got quite a bit of work going on in this area. We've already heard about the 2 bids that form part of the DFT's 4 work streams that I introduced earlier on. We've undertaken some work to modify the the transport and land use model that we use to develop the transport strategy to enable us to identify the carbon impacts of the large-scale interventions we're identifying in the area studies to see what impact they will have on carbon reduction. So that's an important technical enhancement to that work that is helping us with the development of the area studies. We've also set up a Southeast Regional Transport Decarbonisation Forum, which is essentially bringing together local transport authority representatives and representatives from other key stakeholders to obviously help understand and look for areas of joint working across the region on this important decarbonisation topic, which is we're all still very much in a pioneering phase on this, trying to find our way and identify how we take this important work stream forward. So that decarbonisation forum is providing an opportunity for officers to come together to discuss how we do that. We've also got some technical work ongoing on the development of a transport decarbonisation pathway for the Tfse area that we can then disaggregate to each of the individual local transport authority areas. So that sort of shows us the shape of the curve, if you like, that we need to travel down to get to this net zero point, and also appraise some of the impacts of the different policy levers that would be available to us to travel down that trajectory. So that work is currently ongoing, due to report early in the new year, but happy to take any questions that members may have on any of those pieces of work.
Thank you. I've got Tony's hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that. Can I just your paragraph on the bus, on the BSIPs, I would underline the point that you make in 3.2. There is a risk that these will primarily focus on ensuring existing levels of service provision. That, I think, is inevitable, given, of course, the uncertainty about the future funding arrangements that's still to be confirmed around bus support grant. I mean, we're currently stepping down through the interim arrangements, but as I understand it, we have yet to receive confirmation from the DfT about funding. And of course, all bus companies are on life support basically at the moment from the DfT. So, you know, if we get BSIPs that are able to deliver the continuation of pre-pandemic levels of service, we'll be doing bloody well, I would have thought. And that's so the potential, of course, will come with the further work that's referenced in the previous paragraph around enhanced partnerships. And I don't believe that there are any authorities in the Southeast that are going for the franchising model, but I stand to be corrected. I'm not aware of any within our TFSE area. So it's all work around enhanced partnerships, and there's still quite a bit more work to be done on that front. So I suppose my question to you is, how much more do you think of any meaningful nature are we likely to be able to talk about at the meeting in January? You will have had a chance, obviously, to look at the BSIPs, I accept that. So there may be something, but obviously the more detailed work around enhanced partnerships is going to be quite demanding. I mean, we in Reading, even though we own the bus company, which has 90% of the mileage and patronage, we've still got about another 6 or 7 operators to deal with. And in other areas, it's a greater number with a more fragmented network of operators. So I suppose I'm raising the question as to how much progress we can really expect by January in terms of the of that update. It's a pity that Carly from the DfT appears to have left, because I was going to ask her about indications on future funding arrangements. But Mark, you may be able to cover that. Thank you, Chair.
Mark.
Yeah, I think on the funding, I think that's why the work that we're doing is looking very much to the future, because I think what DFT want to hear is how much money do local transport authorities need out into the future, out into, beyond this immediate 3 billion, 3.5 billion that's been identified. They need the evidence to be able to go to the Treasury and demonstrate that there is a clear need and how much it is. And obviously, as we've all the way through the TFSE journey, it's about having a solid evidence base to back up an ask, and that's what we're trying to provide on behalf of the region. So we've got that ambition, we've got our bid in, if you like, for what's needed in the future. On your point about the enhanced partnership work, yes, that's the next big challenge. But I would point back to the earlier item we had on the in-year funding, the 4 work streams, and very much the capability and capacity aspect of the joint bus bid that we're putting in with Economic Heartlands and Transport East. One dimension will be, is there an ask from our local transport authorities for some assistance globally across the region with some of the aspects of those enhanced partnerships, even if that's a forum bringing together, again, everybody who's involved in this to talk about how they're going about the process, picking up on Councillor Humby's point about we can all learn from one another and share expertise, and that's something that TFSE can facilitate by bringing together the key players to talk about these ongoing challenges. But that's the way that would be taken forward through that earlier work that we talked about the in-year funding from, which hopefully will continue into future years on the Bus Back Better work.
Thank you. Ask Marley to come in. Who's substituting today for goodness, Pete. Yes, thank you. Over to you, Marley.
No, thanks, Chair. Just a quick point really around the decarbonisation forum. I understand it's early and we've only had the 2 meetings thus far, so you may not be able to give me quite a detailed answer on it, but what kind of feedback have you had from those who have attended thus far about how useful they found that to drive some sort of decarbonisation strategies forward, looking to the years ahead?
Well, I think extremely useful, and some of the discussion has already started to get sort of quite animated. We're getting good feedback from the floor, if you like, in response to some of the presentations that we've been having about some of the challenges that people face. But as I've sort of identified, that one of the key thrusts of having that forum is to try and identify, if we can, all coming together to talk about use common language, and if we can, adopt common approaches to this whole decarbonisation piece, because lots of work has gone on locally, developing strategies and approaches to decarbonisation. But I very much see, as I made the point during my earlier comments on the decarbonisation work we're taking forward as part of the 4 work streams, coming together as much as we can to ensure that we're all working from the same basis to a common approach, allowing for local variation where it's needed, is a key thing. But it's such a broad topic that what we're doing is having presentations. We've had 3 meetings now. We have a kind of a keynote speaker at the beginning to talk about just the overall approach to decarbonisation. We had somebody to come in and talk about other dimensions. We had somebody at the last meeting talking about a specific tool that can be used to help address commuting journeys and their role in that whole difficult issue about the journey to work and its impact on carbon emissions. So yes, I think it's early days, but I think those people are certainly coming back for more. We haven't had a fall off in the attendance. So I definitely think it does have a vital role moving forward in coordinating the work that's going on in the region, looking for areas of commonality and helping us steer our own work that I talked about, reporting in what the ongoing work that we've got underway to make sure that is meeting people's needs out in the region.
Thank you. Apologies for that introduction. Marley Guthrie is deputising for Councillor Morton. Apologies, I couldn't read and do 2 things at once. I've got Rob followed by Jeff. So Rob.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you, Chair. Pick up on the points that Tony made. about that under 3.2, under the levels of provision, I think we need to remember there's another thing about being joined up. So we need to think about the enablers to that, not just the finances that sit behind that, in terms of like the Transforming Cities Fund and indeed all our own LTPs, about how that enables them to become more commercial and that offer and how innovative they are to give that bus priority, if you like, in terms of walking, cycling and public transport. So it's not just the funding, it's the enablers that we're able to influence to help the companies actually become more viable and more commercial in those certain routes. I know we all have issues, or some of us do, around the rural parts of that, but of course if you can support it in other ways, you know, sort of on the more profitable routes, if you like, making them more reliable, that actually assists with the long-term funding for the rural areas as well. So it's not just the one thing funding, it's the enablement that we're able to do through our local transport plans and Transforming Cities Fund as well.
Thank you, Rob. Did you want to comment, Mark, or are you just noting that?
Just noting, I think.
No comments to add on that.
Jeff.
Yeah, it was just a quickie, really. I'm cheating because I've got something to say in a few items' time, but it was in a very appropriate time to jump in and say it seemed to me Mark gave an excellent presentation on decarbonisation to the last Transport Forum meeting, and that led to a good debate. And everybody who was at that Transport Forum meeting, leaving the meeting feeling that they were much more in tune with the challenge and maybe some of the things that can be addressed. So it was a great presentation, and I just didn't want that to pass without comment.
Thank you, Jeff, and I'm sure Mark's not going to comment on it, but I'm sure we all agree with what you said, unless you've got something to feedback, Mark. Well done. Thank you very much. The 4 recommendations you had as a slide a few minutes ago, do we need to read them again? Shall I take them as printed? All right, so we're going to note the progress on the development of the freight and logistics gateway strategy, note the work on defining the future of the ambition for bus services in the TFSE area, following the publication of the government's Bus Back Better strategy, and note the work that has been initiated on the implementation of TFSE's future mobility strategy, and note the progress on TFSE's ongoing decarbonisation work. Are we happy to do that? Oh, look, it's up there now. Thank you. Nobody against? So we come to agenda item 13, comms and stakeholder engagement. And Lucy, are you there, please?
It's Holly who's going to lead this one.
Holly, are you there?
Hello, I am. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'll give you a quick update on comms and engagement activities since the last board meeting held in.
Disappeared. Oh, what? Oh, no.
Have we lost?
Am I still there, or it just disappeared for a second on my screen? I'll do that a little bit again. So communication and engagement activity since the last board meeting has been undertaken predominantly in a virtual format with a small number of meetings and one board workshop taking place face-to-face. Engagement has focused primarily on supporting preparation around the strategic investment plan, preparing partners and stakeholders for forthcoming consultation process. As mentioned earlier, broader communications activity did slow down briefly whilst the communications manager post was vacant, but I'm here now. I've been in post since early September, so we are working on a forward plan of proactive comms and engagement opportunities, and this will very much work alongside all the work that goes into publication, working towards publication of the SIP. So there will be increased engagement with the Communications and Engagement Working Group as we work through that process. We continue to receive speaker invitations to both national and local events covering a vast array of transport related topics, so we are putting forward people for those. Since the last board meeting, we have welcomed new members to our Transport Forum, including representatives from the National Grid, public health sector and the Chambers of Commerce. Looking at the recent comms and engagement activity that we've had, as you've already heard with the technical work on the area studies progressing, it has become clear that the 5 areas need to be brought together sooner in the process than we'd envisaged. So we will therefore amend the originally proposed 3rd and final stakeholder forums for each area study and replace them with an event or events that will address the combined outcomes of the whole area study work programme. The date and time for this event is yet to be identified, but is likely to be early 2022. Stakeholders from a diverse range of organisations continue to be actively engaged in work on the freight, logistics and international gateway strategy, and we hope to continue to facilitate a freight group or forum for the region post-strategy publication. As mentioned earlier as well, the engagement sessions with all board members are in progress and they will be running until early November, and there are a few more happening over the next few weeks. The meetings are being led by Councillor Glazier and are intended to provide a detailed update on our progress as we move to the development of the strategic investment plan. And these will be followed by the round 2 briefings, which were also mentioned, which will go into a bit more detail around the area studies, work coming out of the area studies. There'll be an opportunity for board members to hear about the geographically specific potential interventions. We've developed a comprehensive stakeholder engagement and communication plan for the SIP work programme, and a summary of this is included as part of the report. So when we look at broadening our engagement, the university stakeholder group met in July of this year and included guest speakers from the Department for Transport who briefed the group on Bus Back Better, Great British Railways strategies. We had updates on the future transport zone and micromobility projects were already also received from Solent Transport and Kent University. As always, board members are welcomed and encouraged to attend this interesting forum if they would like to, and the next one will take place on the 11th of November. The private sector stakeholder group is due to meet later this year, and our private sector partners continue to be actively engaged and supportive of the work of Tfse. This is especially important as we move towards the publication of the SIP. The Regional Transport Decarbonization Forum has now met 3 times. There is a lot of interest in this group and membership continues to grow. The Transport Decarbonisation data gathering survey that we ran on behalf of all the 7 STBs has been completed and response levels were pleasing nationally. A targeted engagement exercise with district and borough colleagues ran in July, with each of the 5 county areas receiving geographically targeted briefing sessions. We briefed colleagues on the progress of our technical work programme and updated them on the SIP development process. The events attracted a good number of district and borough council leaders and relevant portfolio holders, plus district and borough officers with an interest in planning policy, economic development and public health, and we intend to run further sessions in spring next year. We'll be providing an electronic update briefing to all of our MPs in November of this year, and we'll be running another series of virtual drop-in engagement sessions between January and March next year, and board members will be invited to join these sessions where MPs will be updated about the SIP development process. We've got a couple of events coming up over the next, one next month and then one early next year. So we've got the Delivering Economic Growth in the Context of Decarbonisation event, which will happen in November. And this event's been organised in partnership with the Transport Planning Society. The target audience is transport planners from across the Transport for the South East region, but registration is open to attendees nationally. There will also be a joint STB conference and exhibition, which will be held next year. 26th of May is the date for that at the Vox in Birmingham. This will be a multimodal conference focusing on long-term and strategic issues and attracting high-level speakers and delegates. The event has the support of the DFT and we will work closely with the other STBs via the joint communication and engagement groups to plan the content, and board members will also be invited to attend. In conclusion, we will continue to keep our communications and engagement activities under review in light of the COVID-19 situation. The Partnership Board are recommended to note and agree the communications engagement plan for the SIP development process as attached. There will there's a slight tweak to the update that we've given to the report that MP engagement will be early next year now and not now, which is what it says in the report, and we'll be in touch with any authorities that haven't confirmed governance arrangements regarding the SIP sign-off. That's it from me.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Rob? You're muted, Rob.
Yeah, I know you normally find that the best way for me, Jeff. First of all, I wanted to say well done, Holly, and keeping going. When the screen goes off like that, the first time you've done it, so well done on doing that. Keith, I was just wondering, you know, my pet thing is about comms and about whether Holly and the team now would have the contact details for all the head of comms of all the different organisations. I'm sure you will have. And as whether some of that information could be shared through our head of comms at an earlier stage, just so there's sort of, it's like a no surprises. I know that, you know, that very rarely happens, but it's very useful to have that sort of heads up sometimes before we read about it going out as comms from TFSE separately. Just a thought, Keith.
Thank you, and Holly will answer that, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you. We certainly will be linking in with all of the comms leads. I believe that we do have a very good list of contacts, but we will be looking at that and making sure that we, you know, it is full and trying to gather any missing details. But certainly we will be making sure that we share updates with them as early as possible to make sure that everybody's on board and engaged.
Brilliant, great, thank you.
Thank you. Ian.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, really just to say congratulations, and it looks like TFSE is expanding its audience as time goes by and engaging with a lot of new influencers and actors. So jolly well done, and you're taking a role in this directly, aren't you, Keith? Because you've been quite active yourself in sort of talking to a lot of people who may be able to make a difference on this. So all power. I think TFSE is sort of gathering more and more sort of influence and on its general agenda. Well done.
Thank you. It's good to have Holly there, and I appreciate what you've just said, Ian. But actually, I just think the more all of us board members can talk about TFSE with confidence, the more chance we got of landing all this in the future. It's what I say when I'm doing my roundup. This is not driven by me or by the team. They do a really, really, really good job. But actually, they need you as board members to be out there talking about TFSE as well. And with Holly's help, I'm sure we'll make a really good job of that. So thank you very much. Are we happy to accept the recommendation as Holly read out earlier? No and against, so thank you very much. We move to agenda item 14, the Transport Forum update. And Jeff, are you going to introduce for me, please? You're muted as well, Jeff, surely.
Beginner's mistake.
He learned from the best.
Yeah. I think it was Jasmine in the background trying to gag me. So last virtual meeting, we had more than 40 members attending, at least 4 new members representing their sectors of the transport economy, which is a very healthy number and very encouraging. And I think we're likely to get even more members and longer discussion as the transport strategy emerges. I think this is going to sort of start concentrating the mind wonderfully. I mentioned Mark's excellent presentation on decarbonisation already, and that was followed by a good debate. And almost everybody I think everybody who I spoke to after that meeting felt very much better informed about the importance of the issues and the things that need to happen and need to happen quickly to reduce the impact reduce the impact on the environment. So all that's good. I think the one thing that is coming out from this meeting, though, is how to plan the next few meetings of the Transport Forum, just in the sense that there'll be an awful lot of information coming out. There'll be information coming out that is relevant to different parts of the area, potentially, at the risk of winding Tony up again. But the people of East Kent might not be so interested in the Berkshire-Oxfordshire border trouble, for example. So I think I need, what we'll do is I will chat to members of the executive and speak to Lucy and speak to Jasmine about the best way of timing these meetings to make sure we get the best out of them, don't risk overkill on certain subjects and total silence on others. So I think we just need to ensure that our meetings and our meeting agendas reflect the needs of the attendees, especially over this next 3 to 6 months.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think it's a very good point, and I'm sure Jasmine and the team have noted that. I think it's really good that the forum continues to grow. Just must mean that you're doing something right, and the team, the agendas must be interesting, because people won't keep turning up if they're not. So well done for that. Any questions or comment for Jeff? None. Good. Again, thank you very much for what you have done and what you continue to do, Jeff. We do appreciate it. It brings us to agenda item 15, which is responses to consultation. Rupert, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you know, we quite often, during the course of the period between board meetings, have to respond to a number of consultations. We submit those consultations where the deadline is between board meetings, saying that they're draft subject to partnership board agreement. So there are 11 responses to consultations, quite a busy period actually, which are all contained within the paper and the appendices. I don't intend to run through them one by one, but I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions or comments on the consultation responses?
Hello, Keith.
Ian, sorry, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, just a couple of quickies. First of all, yes, it looks like Rupert's and the team has been very busy with all these responses, and I'd like to thank the mentions on the, particularly on the Hans Spatial Framework consultation, putting in a plug for rural area transport needs, and on the Lower Thames Crossing for standing up for protected landscapes and mitigation. And I, for future reference, I've got no sort of wishes to make any changes to the consultation or additions to the consultation responses, but a couple of points. First of all, it'd be useful to actually refer explicitly to the Section 62 of the Environment Act duty on public bodies to have regard to special protected landscapes, designated landscapes in their decisions and policies. So an explicit reference to Section 62 would be helpful, because we've been banging on about that to a number of public bodies. And secondly, there's a little note on the bottom of page 71 of the. Now I'm just trying to track that down. I had a note here. Page 71. This is on the letter to Tiffany Lynch. Oh, LUC. This is again on the Hampshire Spatial Strategy. There's a comment under Strategic Opportunities chapter. There's a reference, item 3, right at the bottom of the page. Say, it should state explicitly that the 20-minute neighbourhood, blah, 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 and people living more locally could reduce the future need for car ownership, which then frees up more road space for other uses. Are we talking about car ownership or car use? Because I think there's a difference here, and it's perhaps something that we need to be aware of. Are we looking to reduce car ownership or reduce car usage? It's maybe a semantic issue, but I think it has implications for future transport usage, where we may be looking at car sharing, and we may be looking to reduce car ownership, or we may just be looking to reduce car usage. But I think we need to be clear in our usage of terms when we make references to this as to what we actually mean. Don't know if Rupert has any comments to make on that.
Rupert.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think one of the areas that we're just mindful of stepping into is where other bodies would make a response. So, for example, Section 62, I think it was the NERC Act. There are other bodies, including Natural England, who are probably add greater weight. What we try to do with our consultation responses is be true to our strategy, which recognises the importance of protected landscapes and designated landscapes. But I do take your point. And then on the car ownership usage, it's sort of one leads to the other, isn't it? If you operate in that 20-minute zone, then car usage drops, and the idea being that changes a behaviour, because people are thinking, well, I've got this car sat in my drive, I don't need it because I can either walk or get really good quality public transport, and then car ownership goes. But again, I take your point, and maybe in future responses we could be a bit more explicit about that usage that might lead to a reduction in car ownership.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I can't see any other. And so we'll note all of the consultations that have taken place, and thank you for that. Which brings us now to AOB. Is there anyone wants to raise any issues? Now's your nothing on the screen, nothing in the room. Last chance. So we will thank you very much for your attendance today, and we will have a virtual board meeting on Monday, the 24th of January at 9 o'clock, and look forward to seeing you all there. I'm tempted to say have a happy Christmas, but I'll resist. Thank you all very much. See you soon.
Thank you.